And strangely, almost counterintuitively perhaps, real hope is at least in part generated by its opposite of hopelessness. This past Monday, I was honored to give the benediction at the swearing-in ceremony of all the newly elected officials in the city of MaryAnn, Connecticut. Got a number of calls from newly elected city councilors and some other folks asking, then a call from the city, and I was happy to go. And it was a really hopeful evening because every single one of those newly elected officials shares our Unitarian Universalist values. Not one candidate who doesn't share our values was elected. And the only city officials remaining in the city of MaryAnn who don't share our values, the only reason they're still there is they weren't on the ballot because it wasn't their turn for their slot in the council or the committee or whatever to be up. And the night was just full of smiles. The room and the people who made up the teams and committees and the city council and the school committee and everybody, it looked like the city of MaryAnn. There were white men and men of color. There were white women and women of color. There were straight people and queer people. It was amazing. And I think it was just part of the general optimism that I think happened in the wake of elections last month around the country, where virtually almost everywhere, people who oppose our values lost. And that's got to brighten things up a little bit. And I felt it. I don't know if you felt it. But that stuff didn't just happen. Everybody didn't wake up on that Tuesday and just show up and decide, oh, we're sick of fascism now. It took a lot of work on behalf of a lot of people to talk to other people, to knock on doors, to make phone calls. And that work was done. And I know some of you were involved in similar work. And I know over the last few months, many of you, along with millions of other people, went to protests and demonstrations and built solidarity and awareness. Because change doesn't just happen. And your protest and your voice and your action, it builds and builds and builds and generates more hope that things are possible in others, and they act, and so on and so on and so on. Hope is what we do. Hope is love in action. Hope is possibility made real through real work by real people in the real world. And this approach to hope is very Unitarian Universalist because, as we say, we are a faith of deeds and not creeds. That we're not so concerned as much with what you believe or what you think as what it leads you to do, how it leads you to act and live in the world. And strangely, almost counterintuitively perhaps, real hope is at least in part generated by its opposite of hopelessness. Cuban-American theologian Miguel de la Torre has a book called Embracing Hopelessness, in which he offers a theology of hopelessness. And he says, all too often, hope becomes an excuse not to deal with the reality of injustice. For those struggling to survive, the truth remains that destitution and death await many of the disenfranchised. Regardless of the optimism professed, the disenfranchised and their children's children will more than likely continue to live in an ever-expanding poverty and injustice. So de la Torre's work reminds us that all too often, hope gets conflated with and defined by this sense of optimism. and often a baseless, unsupported by the facts claim that things will just turn around somehow, will just be better. And in this manner, hope is all too often thought of as just wishful thinking. Thoughts and prayers that things will change. And I think we know that thoughts and prayers, as valid as they can be for what they might inspire us to do, I think, aren't enough. That on their own, they don't change our reality. Thoughts and prayers don't end apartheid or genocide. Thoughts and prayers don't end famine and hunger. They don't end disease. They don't end school shootings. Action does. Doing something does. Hope has to be what we do. Theologian Minister Cody Sanders says that he believes the growing sense of hope that is rising in the world and the kind of way hope is being discussed in theology and philosophy these days, he says, he calls it feral hope, hope that's gone out into the wild and come back and gotten domesticated and gone back out in the wild. He says, in cultivating leaders for the future church, there may be no more important and no more fraught theological idea than that of hope, especially in an era punctuated by collapse. The collapse of the climate, of supply chain, of economic stability, of democracy, of public health, and even of religious institutions. And he points out in his work that in biblical stories, hope is an integral part of exile and disenfranchisement. Hope is part of the Exodus story. It's part of the captivity in Babylon of the Jewish people. But it leads to hopeful texts and encouragement. In the Christian scriptures, that whole story is told in the context of an oppressive Roman regime. And it's a story of hope. He says the fact that we have theologized hope outside of this context of captivity and domination and despair has resulted in the very notion of hope itself becoming captive to the ideologies of empire and then domesticated. It'll all be better someday in heaven. Capitalism picks this up. It'll all be better someday when you retire. But De La Torre and others argue that this hope is domesticated hope. It's just a sense of optimism that sometimes isn't justified at all. Rose-colored glasses. Everything will turn out for the good. Where De La Torre generates a theology of hopelessness, Sanders calls it a feral hope. Hope that returns to its wild roots connected to the fight against injustice and oppression. Austin Channing Brown says that for white people, hope is optimism, but for black people, hope is duty. There's an obligation, she says, to not give up, to not allow yourself to be part of the reason why future generations won't have it better. You're not allowed to give up, because if you do, you may break the chain. You may deny those who come next their fair chance at life as it could and should be. One of my favorite developments in thinking about hope recently, a companion to a theology of hopelessness and feral hope, and what Austin Channing Brown says as duty, is something called hope punk. I hope you read the comment this month because there's much more detail in there. But hope punk was coined by Alexandra Rowland, who's a sci-fi fantasy author, in a blog post about 10 years ago. It went very viral, and she said, the opposite of grimdark is hope punk. Pass it on. If you don't know what grimdark is, that's a subgenre of sci-fi where everything is dystopian and nihilistic and immoral and violent. There are no heroes in those stories. Even the protagonists are people you don't like. It's A Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones or The Sopranos or something like that. And she says the opposite is hope punk. Hope punk is Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and The Shawshank Redemption. Hope is a good thing, Red, maybe even the best of things. That's hope punk. There's a debate to whether hope punk is actually a genre of sci-fi, but it's certainly a meme, certainly a vibe, certainly a trope. And I think it works well with the idea of the theology of hopelessness and the feral hope, and hope is duty. Rowland says, hope punk is the refutation of the glass is half empty, lazy nihilism. She says, hope punk says, no, don't accept that. The glass is half full. Yeah, we're all a messy mix of good and bad and flaws and virtues, and we've all been mean and petty and cruel at times. But, and this is the important part, but we've also been soft and forgiving and kind. Hope punk says that kindness and softness don't equal weakness. That in this world of brutal cynicism and nihilism, being kind is a political act. Compassion is an act of rebellion. It's so punk. If real hope is what we do, hope punk is that connection to attitude, determination, courage that hope requires to take action. In 1986, Vaclav Havel was asked if he thought there was hope in the 1980s. And he said, well, hope is a state of mind, not a state of the world. It's an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. It transcends the world that it is immediately experienced and gets anchored somewhere beyond its horizons. We anchor our hope, our ability to take action, in that courage, that persistence, that resilience, in something quite often outside of ourselves. That's what I hear him say. Hope, in this deep and powerful sense, is not the same thing as things just going well or a willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously going to succeed, but rather the ability to work for something because it is good, because it's the right thing to do, regardless of whether or not it stands a chance to succeed. The more dire the situation in which we demonstrate hope, the deeper our hope is, and the stronger our work needs to be. And because hope is a way we orient our approach to the work of making things better, it's a practice. The more we do it, the more hopeful we become, the more likely we are to act, and so on, and so on, and so on. Because hope is what we do. We take action. It makes the justice and the oppression and the cruelty less likely, and it makes the taking action for justice and the compassion more likely. It helps us be courageous and take action again and again and again and again. In this way, hope regenerates itself. So if hope is what we do, are we hopeful? Yeah, we are. So this is how hopeful we are. If you're not sure that we're full of hope and that hope is justified, this is hope just here at UUCD. It's a lot. We have a green team whose purpose is to keep in front of us our responsibility for the sustainability of everything human beings do. And that includes us here at UUCD. That's taking action against a devastating collapse. And the fact that they remind us to do that over and over again and we take concrete steps, that's hope. That's hope being what we do. Recently, a couple of very hardworking people, including a couple people connected to us here at UUCD, got a big grant to get the Connecticut UU Social Justice Ministry off the ground. That's what we do. We do something to give us the ability to do more, to take action against those things that want us to give up. Hope is what we do. We have a team of people who are working to make sure that the land acknowledgement we say on Sunday morning isn't empty words. They're researching. They're meeting with the Progressive people. They're looking for ways for us to really connect and build relationship. So that hope isn't wishful thinking that, oh, the Native American situation will be better somehow. It requires relationship building and making amends and real action on behalf of wrong that was done. That's hope being what we do. That's hopeful. That's a hope that's real. We have a Palestine Solidarity Committee. In one of the places in the world that may be the most hopeless, genocide, famine, apartheid, murder, continuously calling us to our Unitarian Universalist history of standing with those, taking the side of those who are oppressed and the victims of injustice. In the face of almost overwhelming odds and opposition, they remind us what we're supposed to do as Unitarian Universalists and take action. And they do. That's hope being what we do. Even something as simple on the surface as our practice of family ministry, centering the needs of parents and families and children and youth. It creates hope, and it's not an easy action to take because caring for children is frequently inconvenient and sometimes annoying. I'm a parent, I get to say this. And it often requires parents and guardians and adults and other people caring for children to sublimate their own needs and desires and preferences in order for what the children need. And sometimes that can be a serious pain in the butt. You know that if you're a parent. But you do it with love because you know that your role is to take care of them. The what you do, how you treat them, how you love, ensures that they have the chance at the life in the future you not only wish for them, but make happen by how you behave and how you treat them and how you love. That's hope being what we do. And this afternoon at 4:00, we're going to raise money for Greater Danbury Unites for Immigrants. Music at the Ridge isn't just a nice concert. First of all, it brings art to our space and our community, which is in itself a way to fight back against the dark. But today, especially, connected to Greater Danbury Unites for Immigrants, people in our congregation are doing a lot of work for this group, accompanying people to court, on a moment's notice, responding and getting out in the streets of Danbury to note where ICE is, what they're doing. You know, if somebody was ever on the naughty list, it's ICE. So here are the nice list people going out and watching and documenting and helping. We are helping them funnel their funds and use their money. We have people who are doing paperwork that lawyers need so people can have bond hearings. and have other things. We have people working to make sure people taken into custody, we know where they are, and that they have commissary funds and their families have money and resources to survive without them or to travel to where they may be being sent. People are going around knocking on doors, door to door, like every Saturday this past fall, telling our neighbors what the real deal is with their rights and what's going on. It's an amazing operation. Every time I've done anything with them in the last couple months, it really makes me hopeful. Not just that some magic is going to happen somewhere and this kind of oppression is just going to magically go away, but real grounded hope that there's enough action being taken by enough people who are dedicated enough to win this battle without resorting to the evil of various kinds of violence and deception and lying that the oppressors are using. And all of a sudden, as this holiday season of the winter holidays is coming around, where hope is a big theme, I actually feel hopeful. Because hope is what we do. Hope is a core tenet of Unitarian Universalist theology. James Luther Adams, one of our famous theologians, says one of the 5 core elements of liberal theology and liberal religion is that we have faith in, or we trust in, the idea that there are enough divine and human resources to justify an attitude of ultimate, if not immediate, optimism. He doesn't just say we should trust that everything will just be better. He says we trust there are enough resources to justify that. We trust that we can do enough to trust that eventually the forces of good and love and kindness and justice win. Things can seem dark at times, and this past year has had its share of those shadows. But there is a way through times like this, a way that defeats the darkness and the fascism and the authoritarianism and the meanness and the cruelty. And we know that that way is centered in love, like our values, and it's about kindness and compassion and doing what's right because it's right. It's about duty to those who come after. It's about getting feral again and undomesticating hope. It's about solidarity with the oppressed. That's punk. Because hope is what we do in the face of pain and suffering and injustice. Hope is what we do in the face of depression and grief and illness and addiction, anything else we struggle with. Hope is what we do when others are being hurt and treated unfairly. Hope is, as Unitarian Universalists, what we do. We're people of deeds, not creeds. And hope is what we do. Hope is what we do. Check out my website and blog at tonylorenzen.com for even more resources that will open your mind, touch your heart, and inspire your spirit.